Hello and welcome back to the Detailing Bay. It's a little bit of a different episode this week. We're looking at a piece of equipment rather than a detailing job itself, the paint thickness gauge. Paint thickness gauges are one of those tools that you never know how much you needed it until you've got one, but there is a massive difference in those that are available. So Dave, they start at less than 70 quid and go up to many hundreds, so what's the difference?
What they can measure, really. They can pick up different readings based on the metal or the type it's sat on. Like, for instance, if you've carbon fibre, you've got plastics, you've got steel, you've got aluminium. But for 90% of people just wanting to be advanced home users and get a little bit more information about the paint, then these paint depth gauges that are coming in at around £60-70 will be absolutely fine.
Most people are going to be more concerned about how thick the clear coat is, aren't they? So they don't go through.
They are, but there is a tip to finding a rough, say for instance, go with a £70 paint depth gauge, that is going to give you an overall reading. That's going to include everything, your base, right up to your clear. So, but one thing we don't want to do is we only want to be cutting the clear. We don't want to get past that. So the tip is to find where the paint would be the thinnest. So for instance, there's going to be door shuts, go into the inside of a door shut, inside to a bonnet catch, somewhere like that has been sprayed, it will be thinner on them areas. So what you can do is you could measure, inside door shut, and it's coming up with, say, for instance, 70 micron. You will then go for an exterior part, and then you're measuring it's coming at 110. Then you suddenly realise I've got 40 microns of...
a bit of a window to work.
Yeah, and whilst you can't use that as set in stone, there could always be curveballs within that, it is a pretty good guide. You're also, at that level, you're not doing as major correction work where it is kind of used as a guide to how much you're cutting as you're working through the process. So you do an area cut, you wipe down, and you put your paint depth gauge on there, and you're going, I've removed half a micron. It gives you a good gauge of what's happening that you can't always see. And that's where they really come into their own, really, at that price point. They start climbing in price. And there is a word of warning. There is a lot of duff ones on the likes of eBay and so on. But what you've got to make sure is that it's calibration with these. So you might put it on some metal and it'll give you a reading, but it's like, is that reading correct? So a lot of them will come with calibration shims as well. So it's following the guides to make sure, and it's advised to always calibrate your machine, whatever it be, a £70 one or a £2,500 one. Always calibrate.
Well, do you want to take us through the process of, I know you've roughly explained it there, but say it's just arrived in post, is calibration like your first step? What's the...
So what you'll get is, depending on, let's say it can read both steel and aluminium. So you'll get steel and aluminium shims. So if you go directly onto the steel, it should show 0. Then you will get some plastic shims, which will replicate a surface sat between the two. So you'll get shims running all the way from, say, 5 microns up to 100 microns. So you put one of your shims in and then you measure it. But what you've also got to do is don't just measure one. You've got to allow it about a 5% value dependent on where it sits. The shims normally tell you, so it'll say 100 micron plus or minus 1% or 2%. So at that level, you're not going to get it 100% because you're just not paying for that level of accuracy. And what they'll do then is they'll normally have a calibration mode where you can then trim it in. So you measure it and it's coming in at 120 micron, but it's showing on your shim it should be 100. You bring it down, but like with everything with calibration, you've then got to bring yourself down the shims, but slowly bringing it down. And there is a little bit of time. And once you've calibrated it there, it's going to be good for a little while, but be mindful every now and again to recalibrate and check on it.
So looking at the extremes, like 70 quid entry level, couple of grand top level, what's the difference between that kind of price point? Because ultimately they're doing the same thing. Is it just precision?
Precision, definitely. How they calibrated, definitely on the dearer ones as well. But the one, like, for instance, entry level paint depth gauges from NextDiag, they do brilliant entry level, but they do some pro ones as well. And they give some really good guides. Some of them can read both steel and aluminium. They'll give you the overall depths. They're absolutely brilliant. And then they have great software as well, so they can it uses your phone and it can map out the vehicle, and then you can kind of keep going around it and see the progress you've had.
I like that. That's clever.
And it is cool, and that's where a lot of them it is all about the software. So they're brilliant little paint depth gauges, but the restriction comes when it's still overall readings. So then you've got the middle ground. You've got like the 600, 700, 800 pound paint depth gauges, and they will come from tool manufacturers that just pride themselves on how accurate they can be. So they're doing their overall depth, but their accuracy will be far greater. And then you've got the next leap, which is like your Positex, where they will now start breaking down individual layers. Depending on how much you spend on that is what layers it can break down. So for instance, you could get one that can break down the individual layers on steel. Then you also need them to read them on stuff like carbon fiber, plastics. So unless you're rich and you just proper into your gadgets, then by all means go with one, because it's going to give you every nook and cranny, the insight into your paint and each layer. But if you're just the enthusiast wanting to get a little bit more insight into your paint, there's no need to go to that level. They're purely designed for that top tier, and detailers that are working on, for instance, you get a Ferrari F40 and that's a couple of £1 million worth of car, and you're going to devalue it if it ever needs paint.
Yeah.
You need to avoid that at all costs.
And
you need to read
the paint on that's almost that thin. You can see the weave through
you can see the weave through it. So I wouldn't want to work on one full stop. But if you absolutely had to, and you need some insight into how much have I got to play with here, then you can now start measuring that. And the same applies to a lot of more modern cars and hypercars, supercars that are using carbon fiber parts, plastic parts, and so on. You need to read them as well. You don't want to be guessing on a car that's £250,000 upwards.
Yeah. I were detailing an Audi R8 a couple of weeks back, and it was got performance pack on with carbon fibre rear spoiler, just clear lacquer on it. And I wouldn't like to think I was trying to correct something like that. It's got a scratching without the right gear.
Yeah, because it can get quite mistreated even from factory, and I've seen a lot where they've had like extended carbon fibre packs, like there's a McLaren one so I was over working on, and that had so many extra bits of carbon fibre on it, and some of them just, you can tell from factory, just the way they're handled, it needed quite a little bit of correction work, and you just wouldn't have wanted to go in that. I mean, this car is brand new, it's come from McLaren to the studio. You're not wanting to you don't want to be putting guesswork in there.
Even a couple of grand at that point, it's actually nice, and it's
essential. At that level, if you're dealing with cars like that, it is essential. If you can't read what you're dealing with there, then you shouldn't be at your own risk at that point.
So Dave, give us a step by step, how do you use a paint thickness gauge?
So assume now you've calibrated it, and you would go onto the panels, work way around. You're best having a pen and paper, unless you've got ones like the Next Diag that will record it, and just make a map of the vehicle, or work an area at a time. Say work in the front wing, place it onto the panel, start with either the centre or one of the edges, read the measurement, and then work your way across the panel. Do 3 or 4 measurements across the panel. It's a quick way of making sure there's no spot repair fillers or anything that would raise suspicion, like picking up like it's been blown in from a wing, so possible repair on the door or something like that. So just do across the panel, don't just slap it on the centre. Get your readings, and then, as we said earlier about trying to get a gauge for how much clear you've got on there, finding a thinner area like in a door shut, somewhere that's not exposed, and gauging it solely off that then, and then just keeping an eye on if you're doing a heavier cut, when you stop to do a wipe down, do a measure as well, because that's going to give you a good indicator as well of how quickly you're cutting, how much you've got to play with. But they are super straightforward to use once they're calibrated. It's literally holding it on, waiting, and normally they all kind of give a couple of bleeps and the readings there.
And then just taking your time to get a bit of a map, whether it's digital through your phone or whether you've just got pen and paper.
Yeah, just keep an idea. Otherwise, you start guessing, and if it's important, a few microns. So you just keep a note of it and have a gauge for how far you're going.
So let's say you've done your mapping and you spot an area you're a bit suspicious about. Like you say, it could be a wing that's been blended into a door. So your passenger door, for instance, it's got a different reading at the front of that panel than it has at the back. What do you do? Is that just a red flag to stay away from?
Yeah, that's the car throwing a wild card at you, because suddenly now we've got no way of gauging depths on that door, wing, wherever it is you've got a really high reading. and we don't know what's causing that high reading. We'll start looking closer and we're going, actually, it has had paint. We can see a blend line or something. But we don't know if, if the reading's sitting 220, 230 to 300, you're like, it's just that, it's been blown over. But you can go higher and you're like, is the, am I going to put this filler in here as well? That does make it tougher. And you're going in blind, basically, unless you've got the DIM, the ones that can start to break down the levels, because you've just got no way, you've got no way of really gauging, because you don't know the history. And even though you found the thinner part of the paint, we still don't know what's sat between. That's only going to tell us what the original was. We don't know what was sanded back. It's finger in the air at that point and guesswork, and it's not a nice point. And unfortunately, the cheaper paint depth gauges, while they'll highlight a car's had spray work, it doesn't really help you that much.
No. I suppose if it's located to like one panel and it's consistent across that panel, it's not so bad. But it's like if a cosmetic repairer's used like fade out thinner, and you've got that lacquer just getting thinner and thinner and thinner until it meets with the old paint, as soon as you take a machine to that, you're starting to destroy it, aren't you?
Yeah, it can cause problems. So it is a bit like you need to be wary of it. But it doesn't mean it's like you can't touch it. It just, you may approach it different. You may think, you knew before that, 4 passes, that pad and that compound was getting you the correction you wanted. Let's rein it in a little bit now. Let's go lighter, because this paint is going to react different. We know that for sure now. So it does, it can be handy, but it's an annoyance that you've just got to be careful. But if you don't have the paint depth gauge and you don't pick up any of that and you're zooming through it, and then all of a sudden you've got a really soft door that's been resprayed, but you've had, relatively tough paint prior, and you're going into it and you're attacking it the same, and then all of a sudden you've caused yourself a problem. As if you'd had a paint depth gauge, while it wouldn't have told you exactly what you're dealing with in terms of depths, it would have highlighted your paint's now changing.
Even the most basic model, it's just going to give you a heads up before you do anything.
It's going to go, hang on, them readings are wild. That's had paint.
What a tool to take with you when you go and buy a car.
Yeah, absolutely. It'll tell you the history. Yeah. If you bought the car, then sometimes it's not as much fun. But yeah, you'd be shocked. I mean, as you do, like a lot of people, like detailers, will be able to spot paint anyway, even without a paint depth gauge. But what it can do sometimes, if it's had major work, and your blend lines aren't where you think they are, because, it's had the entire side done. So you're not picking up, because you've not got that almost 50-50, then you go round it. And it also gives an indication, if the paint job's good, but it's picking up that wild card, and they're being open with you and going, yeah, it has had paint, then, that's fair enough. I'm happy with the job. But say you're going around there and suddenly you're picking up 800-900 micron, you're like, oh, it's not just that paint then. It's that filler. It gives you a bit of history that the seller's not always happy sharing. Yeah, they always have a use.
Yeah. I've bought so many cars that looked great at the time, and then as I've started like going around and correcting it, you start to unveil
little problems.
Bad base coats with little lines and stuff in. I think, how did I not spot that before? So I think I might invest.
Yeah, 100%.
So, there you have it. A guide to paint thickness gauges. Thanks for listening.